Growing up, you could always find me with a book in my hand. For me, reading allowed me to enter a whole other world. One day I was an astronaut, the next day I was a crime fighting detective, and one of my personal favorites was when I could imagine myself as a witch fighting alongside the one and only Harry Potter. And not to brag or anything, but I was a pretty cool witch if I do say so myself. Every story I read allowed me to escape into a new and better version of the not so great story I was living. For me, nothing about my story was memorable. If anything, my story was what you read to not be inspired. Yet one day in my English class, my teacher told me that my story was memorable all because I was the one who wrote it. I remember thinking, yeah, right, me? I don't know what he's talking about because I have never read that story. And I was right. I had never read that story. But it wasn't because it didn't exist, but because it was still being written. Every day, we are given the opportunity to write a story in our chapter. But in order to continually write our stories, we must take into account some important factors. First, we have our setting, then our protagonist, and finally, our plot. Each of these factors are essentials that every writer uses to create an amazing story. Of course, there can be hundreds of thousands of other factors you can use, but in every story, you will always find these three. So let's look into what these factors mean within fictional stories and what they mean for our personal stories. Up first, we have our setting. The setting of a piece of literature is the time and place in which the story takes place. One of my all-time favorite story settings will always be Hogwarts from Harry Potter. Every time I read Harry Potter, which is literally every other day, I immediately feel that I'm walking the halls of the wizarding school or sitting in a potions class. However, Hogwarts will always remain an imaginative setting, which sucks because I can 100% confirm that my time at Hogwarts was way better than high school. So what does a setting look like to us in reality? How can our everyday settings be meaningful? Places such as school, our houses, and work definitely don't seem very meaningful when you look at the big picture. However, these seemingly unimportant settings are actually pivotal points in our lives. I want to take us to a place that at first had no significance in my life, the ag class. Here I am on the first day of my second semester of sophomore year, and I'm stuck in some boring agriculture class. I barely spend 20 minutes in the class before deciding that I was going to transfer out of it. So the bell rings and I marched down to the office and demanded they change my schedule. But my counselor looked at me and said, "Sorry, you're just gonna have to stick it out." So the next day, I slowly walked into my ag class to hear even worse news. We were going to have to memorize the FFA Creed. I didn't even know what that was. So for 2 days, I spent hours saying the creed over and over to be able to say it out loud. Finally, the day came and I volunteered first to speak. And after I said the creed, my advisor pulled me aside and simply said, "You're going to join FFA. Simple as that. And boy, would you look at me now. But seriously, the setting of my first ag class was seen as incredibly useless and unimportant to me at the time. However, what I didn't know was that that was to be one of the most defining moments of my future. Not only did I learn to love agriculture and to want to understand it, but I made so many amazing friends and memories along the way. Many of us think that in order for something to have a meaningful impact on us, it has to impact us at the exact moment it happens. But the truth is that we don't notice impactful moments until after the fact. This especially holds true to the settings within our stories. Most of them don't seem very important, but every single one of them are. Right now, some of us are unsure of what's the next step. However, the settings of our story help develop the next factor of the story. Us, or the protagonist. The protagonist is the leading character or one of the major characters in a drama, movie, novel, or other fictional text. One of the best protagonists I have ever read about was Simon Spear from the book Simon versus the Homo sapiens Agenda, or the recent film adaptation Love, Simon. In his story, Simon is a high schooler with a big secret that he is trying to hide. But when an email containing his secret falls into the wrong hands, his secret is at a risk of being thrust into the spotlight. Throughout the story, we see Simon eventually accept that people's perception of you shouldn't affect your life. He has the power to be the man he wants to be. Just like us, Simon had to decide if he would let others' opinions of him shape who he was. Simon learned a lesson that people like myself have struggled with. We are the protagonist of the story, not our friends, our neighbors, or our enemies. This is an extremely hard lesson to learn because as humans, we so desperately want to blame others for our shortcomings. We let their opinions mold how we think and how we think our story should sound. If our story doesn't fit that mold, then we get mad. It's so easy to slip into the roles given to you by others. But as the protagonist, your story belongs to you and only you. Once you realize that, you can begin focusing on the final and most important factor of writing your story, the plot. The plot is the main events of a play, novel, movie, or similar work devised and presented by the writer as an interrelated sequence. When you pick up a story, you are probably picking it up because the plot sounds interesting to you. But nowadays, it is so hard to come by a work of fiction that has a realistic main characters who learns to create their own story. However, a few years ago, I had the chance to read an amazing story that featured one of the most realistic main characters. It was called The Hate U Give, and it was about a young girl named Star Carter who is constantly switching between the poor, mostly black neighborhood where she lives and the wealthy, mostly white prep school that she attends. The uneasy balance between these worlds is soon shattered when she witnesses the unjust shooting of her childhood best friend. Facing pressures from all sides of the community, Star must find her voice and decide to stand up for what's right. Star learns that anybody can be a hero, you just have to use your voice. She began to create the story that she wanted to live. As main characters of our story, it is so easy to lose our voices or purpose in the chaos of our plots. But we cannot do that. Do not allow the injustices of the world to stop you from living your life. Like Star, we must create a path that we find inspiring. The plot of our story might be influenced by society or friends in some small way, but it in no way gives others the right to tell your story. Your plot should be 100% you and no one else. It may take some time, but eventually you will have created a story that deserves to be read. Our stories do not have to be filled with fire-breathing dragons or epic scenes in order for them to be interesting. They just have to be filled with the truth. One of my all-time favorite quotes was said by the rapper Ice Cube. He said, "Our art is a reflection of our reality." This means that our story are not some work of fiction that others read for fun. They are works of art that contain happiness, anger, sadness, and growth. And every single one of us experience this. Growing up, I spent hours inserting myself into novels trying to live a life of fiction that I forgot to live mine. But what I learned is that I am the greatest protagonist ever, and so are you. The setting of my story has allowed me to be where I am today, and while the plot of it is still being mapped out, I know it's going to be amazing. We have got to learn that when writing our stories, we are the only ones who are allowed to hold the pen that writes them. Life is a story, and every single one of us gets the chance to tell our own version. So make sure it's the story that you want to read.